Bitcoin had been on a wild ride, since President Trump's inauguration last month.
Oh, yeah.
It hit that record high of $95,507 on January 20th.
Wow.
And then it's been pretty much downhill from there.
Yeah.
It's almost like the market, celebrated and then got cold feet.
Uh-huh.
What do you think is going on here?
Well, we've got these articles from Barron's and Ford's.
Yeah.
They both point to a market that's, really struggling to figure out what this new landscape means for Bitcoin. You'd think Trump's return would be good for Bitcoin.
Sure.
But there's a lot of uncertainty in the air right now.
Yeah, Trump coming back was a big deal. And not just for crypto.
Right.
But I'm curious, what does it mean for Bitcoin specifically? These articles mention an unfulfilled campaign promise.
Right, the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve.
Oh, yeah.
Remember all that talk about the U.S. potentially holding Bitcoin like it does gold?
Yeah.
Barron's suggests that promise hasn't materialized yet.
Okay.
And it's making some investors nervous.
So is this silence a sign that something's coming, or should investors be worried?
It's hard to say.
What would a Bitcoin Strategic Reserve even look like?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
It's uncharted territory.
Uh-huh.
And it would be fascinating to see how it plays out. I mean, with gold reserves, governments are basically backing their currencies.
Yeah.
And trying to provide stability.
Okay.
But Bitcoin is different. It's volatile.
Yeah.
It's decentralized.
Right.
And it's not tied to any specific government.
That's what makes it so interesting, right?
Absolutely.
A strategic reserve could shake things up on a global scale.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how it would even be managed.
Right.
And what kind of message it would send to other countries.
Exactly. If the U.S. makes a big move like that,
Yeah.
you can bet other countries will be watching closely.
Yeah.
But for now, it's a waiting game.
Right.
And in the meantime,
Yeah.
Bitcoin is also facing some serious macroeconomic headwinds. Aarons highlights inflation as a major concern.
Okay, so help me out here.
Sure.
Why is inflation bad news for Bitcoin? Do people see Bitcoin as an inflation hedge?
You would think so, right?
Yeah.
But here's the thing.
Okay.
When inflation rises,
Uh-huh.
central banks typically raise interest rates
Right.
to try and cool things down.
Okay.
That makes holding safer assets like bonds more appealing
Okay.
because they offer a predictable return
Yeah.
in a time of uncertainty.
Sure.
And that means investors might shy away from riskier assets like Bitcoin.
So instead of running to Bitcoin for safety,
Right.
they're heading for the perceived stability of bonds,
Yeah.
even though inflation is eating away at the value of those bonds.
It seems counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But that's often how market psychology works.
Right.
People crave certainty when things feel shaky,
Uh-huh.
and bonds offer that illusion of stability. Plus, with interest rates going up, the cost of borrowing increases, which can slow down investments in riskier assets like Bitcoin.
Okay.
It's a complex web of interconnected factors.
And then to make matters worse,
Yeah.
Forbes throws in this term death cross.
Yeah, I know.
That sounds ominous.
Right.
Something out of a horror movie.
I know it does,
Yeah.
but it's just a technical indicator
Okay.
where a short-term moving average crosses below a long-term one. Some trainers see it as a bearish signal,
Okay.
potentially indicating further price drops.
Okay.
But it's important to remember that technical indicators are just one piece of the puzzle.
So maybe not a death knell for Bitcoin,
Right.
but definitely a warning sign.
Exactly. We
Okay.
need to look at the bigger picture.
Uh-huh.
And that picture includes some pretty wild accusations of price suppression.
Oh,
Samson Moe, who's a big name in the crypto world,
Yeah.
is claiming that someone is deliberately manipulating Bitcoin's price to keep it down.
hold on. Are we talking conspiracy theories here?
Well,
What evidence does he have for that? And who would even benefit from suppressing Bitcoin's price?
he points to the recent sideways price action as suspicious. Bitcoin surged after Trump's election.
Right.
Then it seemed to stall.
Okay.
Moe argues it looks too manufactured to be natural.
Interesting.
Forbes suggests large institutions could be suppressing the price
Okay.
to accumulate more Bitcoin at a lower cost.
Interesting. So they're playing the long game,
Yeah,
trying to control the market for their own gain.
potentially.
But what about the other side of the coin?
Uh-huh.
Forbes also mentions some positive news amidst all this doom and gloom.
Oh, yeah, amidst the death crosses and whispers of manipulation.
Right.
There's news that Abu Dhabi's sovereign wealth fund is investing in Bitcoin's ETFs, specifically BlackRock's.
Okay.
And BlackRock's own iShares Bitcoin Trust, IBIT, is booming.
Wow. So even with all this uncertainty,
Yeah,
some massive players are betting big on Bitcoin.
they are.
What does this mean for the average person who's just trying to make sense of it all?
It's a huge signal.
Yeah.
These institutions aren't just throwing money around. They're doing their research and seeing long-term potential in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Even with all the current challenges,
Okay.
Forbes calls it a global adoption race.
Okay.
As countries and institutions try to get a piece of the pie.
A race to adopt Bitcoin.
Yeah,
That sounds like a major shift.
it is.
But how do you square that with all the fear in the market? Well, Norv mentioned this fear and greed index.
Right.
And right now it's showing fear.
Yeah, the Fear and Greed Index measures market sentiment.
Okay.
How optimistic or pessimistic investors are feeling.
Yeah.
Fear suggests they're hesitant, maybe spooked by the recent price drops.
Right.
And the negative news?
So even with big players getting involved, the average investor is still feeling nervous.
It seems that way.
What does that mean for the future of Bitcoin?
Well, that's where things get really interesting, and that's what we'll dive into next.
So we've got this mix of big players jumping in while the fear and greed index is showing fear.
Right.
What does that mean for the future of Bitcoin? Where do we go from here?
It creates an interesting dynamic, doesn't it? It
Yeah.
reminds me of a high-stakes poker game.
Okay.
Everyone's watching each other,
Uh-huh.
trying to read the signals and figure out who's going to blink first.
So how do we read the signals? What should people be paying attention to in the coming weeks?
We'll keep an eye on any announcements from the Trump administration
Okay.
regarding that Bitcoin strategic reserve
Right.
or any new crypto regulations.
It'd be a huge deal if Trump finally reveals his vision for crypto in his second term.
Absolutely. And beyond the political landscape,
Yeah.
watch for any other major institutions announcing investments in Bitcoin.
Okay.
Every time another big player joins the game, it lends legitimacy to the entire crypto market.
It's almost like a domino effect.
Right.
The more institutions get involved, the harder it becomes for others to ignore it.
Exactly. And of course, we can't forget about the overall economic picture.
Right.
How inflation plays out, how the Fed reacts with interest rates.
Yeah.
Those things will all have a ripple effect on Bitcoin and the broader market.
So it's not just about Bitcoin in isolation.
No.
It's about understanding all these interconnected forces that are influencing each other.
Right. And that's what makes this so fascinating and so challenging to predict.
Uh-huh.
You have technical factors,
Right.
market psychology, global economics, and even geopolitical considerations all swirling around.
Let's go back to those accusations of price suppression for a minute.
Okay.
Is there any evidence to support that, or is it just a conspiracy theory?
It's hard to prove definitively,
Okay.
but the timing of some of these price drops is definitely suspicious.
Yeah.
There were several moments where you might have expected to see a surge in Bitcoin's price,
Uh-huh.
especially after Trump's election and all the hype around a potential strategic reserve.
Right.
But instead, the price seemed to stall or even decline.
It almost seems like someone stepped in to prevent Bitcoin from gaining momentum at crucial moments.
Yeah, it's possible.
But if that's true, who has that kind of power?
That's the big question.
Yeah.
Some people point to large institutions who might benefit from keeping the price low,
Okay.
so they can accumulate more Bitcoin.
Right.
Others suggest governments might be trying to suppress its growth
Okay.
because they see it as a threat to their control over the financial system.
So we've got potentially shady investors, governments, and maybe even central banks lurking in the shadows.
It's a possibility.
It sounds like a real-life thriller.
I know, right?
But let's talk about that death cross for a second.
Okay.
Should people be genuinely worried about that?
Remember, technical indicators are just one tool among many.
Right.
They're not crystal balls,
Yeah.
but they can reflect market sentiment.
Uh-huh.
And that sentiment can sometimes become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So if enough people believe the death cross signals a price drop, they might start selling.
Right.
And that selling pressure could actually cause the price to drop.
Exactly. It's fascinating how psychology plays such a huge role in market movements.
Yeah.
Sometimes fear itself can become the most powerful force.
So how do we navigate all those?
Well-
We've got conflicting signals, accusations of manipulation, and an overall sense of uncertainty.
Yeah.
What's the average person supposed to do?
I think the key is to stay informed.
Okay.
Be critical of the information you're consuming and don't let fear drive your decisions.
Right.
Remember, Bitcoin is still a relatively young asset.
Yeah.
And it's going through growing pains.
Like we're watching a teenager mature in real time.
I like that.
There are going to be awkward phases and rebellious streaks,
Uh-huh.
but ultimately, it has the potential to grow into something truly remarkable.
I love that analogy.
And just like with a teenager, it's important to focus on the long-term potential
Right.
rather than getting caught up in the day-to-day drama.
Exact.
So how do we assess that long-term potential?
Hmm.
What are some of the key things that will determine whether Bitcoin succeeds or fails?
That's a great question, and it's something we'll explore as we continue to dive into this complex and fascinating world.
So we've talked about market manipulation, the death cross, and the influx of institutional investors.
Yeah,
It's a lot to digest.
it is.
But for someone who's new to all this, what are the key factors that will determine Bitcoin's long-term success? What should they be paying attention to?
You're right, it's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things to watch is regulation.
Okay.
How governments around the world choose to regulate Bitcoin will have a huge impact on its future.
Right.
Will they embrace it, try to control it, or even attempt to ban it?
Yeah.
It's a bit of a Wild West right now.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And that uncertainty can be both exciting and nerve-wracking.
It's like we're watching a new frontier being explored in real time.
It is.
And with any new frontier, there are risks and opportunities.
Absolutely.
What are some of the potential risks that people should be aware of?
Well, as we've discussed, volatility is a big one.
Okay.
Bitcoin's price can swing dramatically in short periods.
Yeah.
And that can be unsettling for some investors.
Sure.
Then there's the security risk. While the blockchain technology underlying Bitcoin is very secure,
Yeah.
there's always the potential for hacking and theft,
Right.
especially on exchanges where people store their Bitcoin.
So it's important to choose reputable exchanges and take security seriously.
Absolutely.
But what about the opportunities? What are some of the potential upsides of investing in Bitcoin?
One of the biggest appeals of Bitcoin is its potential to disrupt the traditional financial system.
Okay.
It offers a decentralized, peer-to-peer way to transfer value without the need for intermediaries like banks.
Right.
This could lead to lower transaction fees, faster processing times,
Yeah.
and greater financial inclusion for people who are currently underserved by traditional financial institutions.
That's a compelling vision.
It is.
But even if you believe in the long-term potential of Bitcoin, how do you actually invest in it responsibly?
Yeah.
It all seems so complex.
It can definitely feel overwhelming at first.
Right.
But the good news is there are more resources than ever before to help people learn about Bitcoin
Okay.
and make informed investment decisions.
Right.
There are books, podcasts, online courses,
Yeah.
and even financial advisors who specialize in cryptocurrencies.
Okay.
The key is to do your research, start small, and never invest more than you can afford to lose.
Those are wise words.
Thanks.
And speaking of wise words, any parting thoughts for our listeners as we wrap up this exploration of Bitcoin's wild ride?
I think the main takeaway is that Bitcoin is a powerful technology with the potential to change the world.
Yeah.
But it's still early days, and there's a lot of uncertainty.
Right.
Don't get caught up in the hype or the fear.
Okay.
Stay informed, be patient, and remember that the future is still being written.
That's a great reminder.
Yeah,
This is a story that's still unfolding.
Yeah.
And it's going to be fascinating to see where it goes from here.
Absolutely.
So to our listeners, we encourage you to keep exploring,
Yes.
keep learning, and stay tuned for more deep dives into the most interesting corners of the world.
Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next episode.
Great advice.
Until then, stay curious.